Hello everyone, welcome to the ATAR Notes How to ACE VCE lecture. My name is Sunny. I'm really excited to be delivering this lecture to you guys today. And I really hope that, it will help you set some good study habits for year 12 and get that extra bit of motivation, as well as clear up some important misconceptions that a lot of students have around how study score works, how ATAR works, which are really important. Um, so just wanted to start with a quick little bit about ATAR notes. Obviously, we've been offering a lot of free resources for students like you to help you guys really thrive in your studies. And we've been offering these kinds of free lectures for a very long time. And this is in line with our mission to help you guys as students as much as possible and provide you with, the most supports during these important years of your schooling. So there are a lot of obviously resources, including free resources that we offer. And you can see a lot more on the ATAR Notes website at atarnotes.com. So we have things like free notes and free videos, guides from past students. And, during this session, if you'd like to ask me questions about some of these resources as well, feel free to. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So we do have the Q&A where you can inquire about any of these resources if you would like. And of course, we have a lot of very useful resources, namely TuteSmart, where you can get online tutoring for pretty much all of your or most of your subjects from recent Year 12 graduates that have a lot of experience with these subjects, including myself. Tons of study guides from past students who, a lot of them are from past students who achieved top marks and are aiming to help you achieve the same thing. You can get lots of advice and tips and study advice on how to achieve the best marks you possibly can. And Ed Unlimited, which includes a lot of study guides for all of your subjects. So thank you for these April lecture series sponsors, Latrobe, RMIT, Deakin, UTS, and Macquarie University. You might have noticed that there are some sessions running for universities as well that you should definitely pop into and check out if you're interested. And we'll move on into our content, guys. So again, big welcome to the How to Ace VCE April lecture, and just a little bit about myself to start us off. So my name is Sunny. I recently graduated school in 2021 and I achieved an ATAR of 96.70. So I did get some good study scores, including 47 in legal studies and 40 plus study scores for the rest of my subjects. So literature, English language, further maths, and psychology. And I'm currently in my second year of completing a bachelor's of paramedicine at Monash University. Absolutely love my course, and it was really, really nice for me personally, being able to achieve the ATAR score that I needed to get in at first instance into my degree, not having to worry about any pathway options to end up in my course if I potentially didn't get my ATAR. And also really want to address today some important tips to do with our mindset organization, studying strategies, and tips that can help all of you guys get there and stay motivated for the rest of this year, because we know that's very hard to do. It is a very stressful year and you guys have so much pressure. um, don't let it get to you. Stay on top of it all, and I promise this year can be a breeze. And here to help. We're here to help and support you guys. So, the first thing that we'll have a look at is some common VCE phrases. These are some things that you might have heard people say before, and we really want to address these. So, the first one is year 12 will be the hardest year of your life. What do you think about that? Well, obviously it can be, and for a lot of students, it might as well be, and it might feel that way, but it doesn't have to be. Um, and it might be the hardest year that you experience so far, but it probably won't be if you look in the long term for the rest of your life. You have many years left to go, and so much more potential and capability left to sort of unlock. So year 12 cannot be that hard. You know, when you move into things like, you know, tertiary course, your university pathway, you might realize actually year 12 might have not been so difficult. So think forward, think ahead, think to the great things that you want to do, and let that motivate you. Another saying is something similar to, you know, to do well in year 12, you have to be a sort of mindless robot with no personality who studies a ridiculously high number of hours every single day. Um, and that's absolutely not true. I might have sort of believed this in year 10 and 11, especially when hearing, you know, the year 12s complaining about the huge number of hours that they study, um, and, you know, thinking, I don't know if I can do that. But it's either more to do with either exaggerating or not studying well. So, you know, how are we setting a routine? What's our study schedule? Is the reason it's so overwhelming and we kind of feel overwhelmed by it all because we don't have a good study schedule. We don't have good study habits. We struggle to stay focused and stay on task. And that might lead to us being way too stressed out with our study. And it doesn't have to be that way, which really want to address during this lecture. Another one is you need to study 24/7 in year 12. There's no time for a holiday, and if you take a break, you will fail. And it's quite the opposite because we know we can get burnt out very easily, especially, you know, as it gets closer to the exam period. We need to take breaks, a lot of breaks, or we could burn out and, you know, fail to achieve the scores that we're aiming for, both in terms of specific subject study scores and our ATAR. So it's really important to be cautious. You know, you need to plan your time really well so that you always end up having some free time, some time to yourself to do the things that you enjoy, to do the things that rejuvenate you and kind of give you that energy back. Um, it's we have to be smart with how we study, and get to get to the point where, you know, it's the least stress we possibly could feel, and it's all about our mindset and our organization with that. Your ATAR is just a number and doesn't define you. Now that's another saying. Now this is with this one, am I going to say that that's completely untrue? Well, not really. We know we need to get obviously the ATAR that we need, the minimum ATAR to get into the specific course that we would like to do. Of course, when you're completing your preference list to get into universities, you know, there are same courses at other unis that you potentially, you know, don't want to do as your number one, but they might need a bit of a lower ATAR to get in, and potentially you can still end up doing, you know, the course that you want. So that's always an option as well. Um, but ATAR is important for you to be able to get into your most preferred pathway, the course that you want to do at the uni that you would like to do it at, and that you think has the best course for whatever degree you would like to pursue. So ATAR is very important so we can get in there straight away, and even things like being offered a scholarship and other opportunities. You know, it might be very important or at least very helpful. A bad ATAR is not the end of the world. You know, there are pathway options where you can transfer from one course to another after a certain period of time, depending on the course. There are some courses, such as to do what I'm doing, like paramedicine and a lot of things in the medical field, you actually wouldn't be able to transfer so easily into those courses. So it is kind of important, guys. So we want to get it right the first time. And not saying that this means you should put a lot of pressure on yourself, but definitely saying that, we really need to try hard this year and know that we did our best and be proud of ourselves, be happy with ourselves, be content with whatever the outcome is. And the other one, so what do you want to do next year? This is more of a question than a phrase or a statement, but you don't need to know exactly what you're working towards. I had no idea what I wanted to do at the start of year 12, and I kind of figured out that I wanted to do paramedicine more towards the beginning of the whole application period. Um, and that's completely normal. If you consider a range of options, that's probably best. If you feel a little bit confused, keep a few options in mind. Definitely now is the time to research courses, and try to make up your mind, but don't put pressure on yourself. And you might even start a course and then change courses a semester, a year and a half into uni. That's completely fine. The most important thing is that in the end you should end up doing what you enjoy and what you feel is right for you. And the journey to get there, that's not important. Similarly, if we end up doing a course we don't particularly like, you shouldn't stick to that. You shouldn't put pressure on yourself to think, this is what I should be doing, this is what I have to do, I need to stick with this decision. It's really not like that. Um, so don't put pressure on yourself to make a decision because these are big decisions. Give yourself time, think on it, and know that your end decision doesn't have to be your ultimate decision. That's completely okay. And a lot of people experience this. And it's a lot better to change your mind and then do something else than end up doing something you don't enjoy or finish an entire degree for something and you don't enjoy it. So yeah, these are just some important considerations that I've just talked us through. Hopefully clearing up some misconceptions for you guys and providing you with some assurance. And now, kind of the layout of today. For the first half of our lecture, we will be talking about mindset, organization, how to study, and other tips and tricks and things that have personally helped me as well. I'll draw a lot on my own examples from when I was at school to even like kind of how things are when I'm at university as well. That will hopefully help you and set everything kind of into place and make it really understandable and easy to take some good things from this lecture that you think can help you and apply it to your own life. And then the second half of our lesson, we will talk about VCE score calculation. So we'll talk about how study scores are actually calculated and how ATAR actually works, which a lot of students have plenty of misconceptions about. And, I do think that probably each and every single one of you will still learn something from those aspects of the lecture. So please don't disregard that information because it is quite important, and you can definitely fix some misconceptions that you have. So this is we're going to talk about motivation in terms of our mindset. And I really like this quote here. Whoever you think you can or you think you cannot, you are right. And what does this mean? So obviously, motivation is the first step to our success. We need to think we are able, even if something is very hard, even if you're finding a subject very hard, maybe you're doing English and you're thinking, oh, it's really hard for me to write essays. If you just convince yourself to think that you can do it, you can figure everything out, you will. Just without a doubt, I can say that with full confidence, you will get through it. Um, Having motivation, no, still not saying that you'll get through it quickly. It might be challenging. You might need some additional support, whether it's your teacher, whether it's ATAR notes or Toot Smart services. You might need some support. It might take a while, but we can improve. We can fix our issues, and we can get through year 12 and get to where we want to be. But on the other hand, if we think we're not capable, if we put ourselves down, if we judge ourselves, if we think, I have, received such a low score for my SAC, I'm going to put myself down for this and judge myself for this, and I think the rest of the year is going to go like this, etc., etc. That's also likely to happen because putting ourselves in a position where we think we can't do something is the worst way to go. It's setting us up for failure. So we need to trust in ourselves and believe in ourselves and know that we can get through this year. We can do this. So, absolutely everyone, every single student is capable of getting high scores in VCE. Whether that means, you're not particularly, you don't feel you're particularly good at a subject, chances are you need to change some of your study strategies, you need to clear up some issues with the subject, you might need to spend more time on that subject. You can still get there. You can get to the highest score range, and that's true for absolutely everyone, guys. And doing well is all about, brings me to my next point, consistent hard work, how much time and effort you put into your subjects, and how well you apply yourself to studying consistently, of course, and also, you know, some students do a technique where they kind of, if they're struggling with a subject, they'll do the easier things, the things that they find easier, the things that they're a little bit better at, than looking into the things that they actually really struggle with and that they probably should be working on. So we need to study smart. And it's a little bit to do with innate intelligence for sure, but that is not the main, determinant of how well you're going to do and what you're going to score. We can, take a really smart student that it doesn't take them much to learn everything, and we can still get to their level and even above that level if we just work consistently and we work hard. And we have so much time. It's only April now, guys, to catch up with all of those subjects and get to where we want to be. And nothing is really worse than looking back on VCE and feeling like we could have done better, or we could have done a lot better, and having regrets about our results and how we studied. So it's really important to change our mindset about due dates. That's the first strategy that we're going to have a chat about. Instead of keeping it to the latest possible date, like the night before, doing homework, doing work, doing SAC prep the night before, we really want to do our homework as soon as we get it, while the lesson and the content is fresh in our minds. And also, if you have a SAC coming up, also means start studying early, revising early, make it easier for yourself. And if we make this a habit now, this is going to make the rest of the year so much easier. So here's an example. If, say, on Monday we get a task that is due on Friday, we would do the task on Monday. And then when it comes to Thursday, we can watch or listen to all the other students kind of freak out about the task while you sit smugly at home and you are resting and you are enjoying your night and you have time off and you've done all of your work for the week for all of your subjects as well. And then chances are on Friday when we hand in the task, ours will probably probably be better than everyone else's because we didn't rush it the night before. So some important things as well, goal setting. So setting goals, it works for a lot of people, not for everyone, but hopefully it works for you and it's something you can use. So this was my attitude when I did VCE, trying to do as well as I possibly could on every single SAC and exam and see where it gets me. So also when I got my results back, and sometimes my SAC result wasn't exactly what I wanted or what I expected, particularly for English subjects, where the marking can be a little bit unpredictable and teachers really vary across schools, and I did all of the English subjects. That would happen, but I wouldn't be disappointed in myself. I would know that I did as well as I possibly could, and I would have no regrets. It would not put me down going forward. I would get over it very quickly, and I would just work towards the exam. I would continue to work towards the exam coming up at the end of the year. So the key point with that is this is going to help us to not give up and just keep chipping away. Some things take time. It's okay if at the start of the year you're in a very different position compared to the end of the year. That's likely to happen to a lot of students. And your exam will be the biggest determinant of your study scores for your subjects. just stay motivated and set those goals. I need to work as hard as I do to get a certain result. That's the result that I want and need, and just keep chipping away towards that. So about teachers, we really need to work with our teachers. They should be viewed as our friends and not our enemies. Um, and a lot of students fall into the trap of kind of developing this me against them sort of attitude, and blaming teachers for not teaching the way that they want, or not getting the results that they would like. They will say things like, this is because this teacher is strict and they mark like this, um, and not because of my own work that I've put in. Which really, we should really practice accountability, holding ourselves accountable for every single thing that happens. Sure, our teacher say they don't teach the way that we think is best for us. Well, have we still exhausted that resource? We should be coming to our teacher and saying, I need help with this. Can you please help me? Can you please look at my work? Can you explain this to me? Utilize your teachers. Do not set them as sort of your, enemy and blame them for every result that you get or for struggling with a subject, because they are there to help you. Ultimately, that's what they're there for, and you really need to utilize them as a key resource. And if you kind of pin blame on your teacher, well, obviously that's going to be very difficult, isn't it? So be cautious of that, and make sure your relationships with your teachers stay good. So yeah, they can be our most valuable resource, and they can really help us with our subjects. Next, we'll have a chat about organization for this year. Very important. So, mindset is definitely the first step, but then it comes to also how we organize, our study schedule, the days we study, the days we have off, and all of these things. And that needs to be done effectively, and we need to be able to stick to that in order to set good habits. So, one strategy is to-do lists. Um, so you can have study timetables. Obviously, this is what some students do. I never personally like them. And oftentimes they don't apply. They might not be relevant. For example, your schedule changes every week. We know we have stacks. We have different priorities every week in terms of subjects. So say your study timetable saying you have to study maths one evening, but you have an English stack the next day. Well, now that's not going to make much sense, right? Um, so if we are going to use our study timetables, we need to make a new, relevant, updated one each week. Sounds a bit tedious, maybe, but it will help you stay on top of all of your work and all of your stacks, and it will not take long to do. Especially as you continue to utilize them, you will get more and more used to utilizing them. So to-do lists provide us with a lot of flexibility and motivation. Ticking things off is so motivating on your to-do list, guys. And of course, it's flexible. You can modify it every single week and change it depending on what your needs are during that week. But that being said, there's still good to-do lists and there's still bad to-do lists. So we'll look at an example of each, and kind of that's really important to have a look at. So if you do try to adopt this strategy, you do it effectively, and it doesn't end up being kind of like a useless thing that we're going to abandon later on, right? So a bad to-do list looks like this. Say it says revise psychology, revise legal studies, revise specialist mathematics, job interview next week, get 99.95 ATAR. Looks quite silly, right? But what are some things we see with this to-do list? So first of all, it's not very specific. It's too vague. It's for our subjects, it's just saying revise, revise, revise. Also, 3 subjects in one day, that doesn't make any sense. But it's not specific enough to provide us with the motivation to tick things off and do things. Instead, we want to specify, are we doing questions from our textbook? Are we doing a practice sack? Are we answering questions? Are we reading our notes? Doing our notes, etc., etc. It needs to be as specific as possible so that it tells you exactly what you need to do, Because also remember, we might kind of forget from when we wrote the list when we're actually trying to use it, and it ends up being an actually effective tool. There's also relevant things on this to-do list. Job interview next week. Maybe put that in your Google Calendar, maybe put that in your notes on a poster in your room somewhere, but separate it from your to-do list for school specifically. And then get 99.95 ATAR. That's a very high and overwhelming goal to stick to. Um, probably don't include this on our to-do list because when things start not going well or not going the way that you planned, so aka not getting 100% perfect scores on everything, which is likely to happen, then we're going to be pretty disappointed and unhappy with ourselves, and that's not going to be helpful that we see it on our to-do list as a note. So a good to-do list. First of all, look at the level amount of detail. Um, and let's have a look at this one. We have very specific notes like respond to my teacher's email, summarize legal studies class notes from Tuesday. This is our revision that we meant. That was very vague in the previous example. Revision questions 1 to 10 for specialist mathematics SAC. And then a good to-do list should also have a kind of optional, if you have the time, section. Extra things to do, motivating, because we've still put them on our to-do list. We want to tick them off. If we're finding all of this easy, we're just cruising through and we have some extra time. And remember, we're really trying to work hard this year. We're likely to go to this section and do some of the things in here. So it has some specific notes like read the biology textbook chapter 9. So potentially doing some catch up, looking at the material before you actually go to class. Super helpful because it's going to make the content a lot easier to understand. And you'll also be very prepped for your lesson. And then clean room. We can also just put that idea in our head as well. But ticking off all of these goals increases motivation. And because they're so specific, and easy to manage and kind of split into bite-sized chunks. We know exactly what to do. It's not going to take so long and be such a big, intimidating task that we're actually likely to get through it and complete to-do lists that are so specific and so approachable. So having a chat about distractions in our study space, organizing that is very important. We need to have study spaces, specific study spaces, and specific no study spaces. So I have a desk with a computer. This is where I always study. This is where I will always study. Stick to that for the entire year. Another study space, maybe your kind of year 12 lounge in your school, the library, or your local library, etc. Study spaces. But when you're relaxing on the couch at home, where you watch TV in the living room, this should be your no study space. This is a designated relaxation zone for several reasons. We don't want to associate it with study and start studying there, and it's probably not the best environment, and it's likely to lead to distractions or wanting to do something fun and relax instead, like watching Netflix, or the environment just might not be great. There might be noise, might have our family around, and we need to separate these kinds of spaces as no study spaces. I will not study in here. It's not effective. It's potentially a waste of my time and might lead to other distractions. So if we have a routine with less distractions, we will have a better study, which is what I'm getting at. We can't try to sort of half study and half relax, especially if we're using this study space. This is likely to happen. We need to study properly and then relax properly. When we're studying, we don't have our phone anywhere around us. We focus on our work, we get our work done. Then we take our phone back, or if we're having a break, of course, we take our phone back and we go and enjoy ourselves and do whatever we like to do in our free time. And that will keep us the least tired and least stressed out that we possibly can be during this year. So this is how we need to do it, guys. And obviously lead to a lot more enjoyment and happiness, lead to much better total utility. What's also really good is where you can avoid it, not studying right before you go to bed, because it might make it difficult to sleep and have a good night's rest when you're still thinking about your subjects and the work that needs to be done, and a topic you don't fully understand, etc., etc. That's going to stress you out and you're going to wake up stressed. So it's really good if you can, keep the last hour or two of your evening completely dedicated to yourself and doing things that you either need to do for yourself or your, leisure time, relaxing. The exception of that being is I always really liked doing some revision study just before I went to bed for SACs and exams, because if you do like some revision just before bed, and scientists have proven it's much more likely to stick in your head, so that when you wake up, you remember that information a lot better. It's fresh in your mind. And then it's also really good to do some revision in the morning as well. So that's a little mini tip for SACs and exams specifically when you have important tests. And of course, being avoiding distractions, having designated study spaces, and separating our study and relaxation time completely will lead to a higher quality of work. Think about the standard of your work. If you're, say you're really working hard on a task, but you keep looking at your phone and going off track, doing things around the house, talking to friends, talking to family, that's not going to be very effective, is it? How good can the work produced by you be if you're not fully focused on the task? How good, there's obviously going to be some mistakes more likely in your work than if you had been completely focused and had zero distractions. So, important things to consider. We'll have a chat about routines now. Having routines is extremely important in VCE, and the earlier that you develop one, the easier it will be to stick to. So if you haven't yet, this is kind of what this lecture is also aimed at, to help you develop those super important routines. And it's definitely not easy. It's a task that will take you a lot of time. You will slip up every once in a while, but once you have a routine, it will remove sort of the mental effort out of studying and viewing it as a tedious task. When you make it a routine, it will just feel like, part of the other, all of the other things you do in your daily life. Like, I got home from school, now I'm gonna study, then I'm gonna rest. That's cool. That's just a normal day to me. I am not bothered by the fact that I'm going to go and study right now. So it will really take out the mental effort and just the sort of disdain or dislike for the task for you guys. So, getting these good habits as early on as possible is key. So, drawing on examples from my own journey, and how I had a routine that really helped me. During VC, I traveled an hour each way to school every day, so taking a train and a bus. I had sports, I had a lot of extracurriculars as well as hobbies that I did throughout the year, and I also worked two jobs casually. I worked quite a lot. But really, my experience also shows, even if you're really busy and you have a lot of things going on, you don't have to give everything up. You can fit everything in, and a routine can really help you to work, you see, around your life, whatever your circumstances may be. So I got into a habit of, depending on my availability and how much I had going on, consistently studying for at least 1 to 4 hours or so when I got home after school every single day. I would take Fridays after school off to let myself relax and do something that I enjoyed. And same with Sundays. I would take the day to recover and get prepared for the week ahead, and have the energy and motivation to, learn new content and get through the year. I also never studied past 9 p.m. except prior to exams, which should also mention, prior to exams, I would also study, on the Fridays and Sundays sometimes, just to let you know, depending on the need, like how much I felt I needed to study to get the results that I wanted. And this was very effective. this kept me, rejuvenated and feeling well throughout the entire year, and I never felt tired, exhausted, or extremely stressed out thanks to this routine. And I would do some work every Saturday morning and evening, but I would have most weekends free to do the things that I enjoyed, and see friends and, use them for hobbies or work, etc. So even on the weekend, it's really good if you can kind of spread the work out so you still feel like you've had a weekend, but you're still getting things done. And that will keep you sort of stress free. So it really shows that obviously reading, looking at an example like this, it also shows you that, a habit and a good study routine, an organized study routine, it's difficult to form, but then it becomes easy to stick to when you make a consistent routine out of it. So here is a routine example for a 2 hours of study day, say Monday to Thursday, disregarding Fridays because I said I would have that day off. So say if at 4:30 I would get home from school, from 4:30 to 5 I would take some time to relax, recover, rest a little bit before I got into the studying, which is very important because we know that when we get home from school we're pretty tired. We've been there all day. So between 4:30 to 5 I would do things like, you know, eat something, have some kind of snack, have tea or coffee, scroll through social media and catch up and text friends, talk to my family, and then I would study for about an entire hour from 5 to 6 and fit in a little break in between the rest of the studying, which is like if you don't do that, it might be okay on a day like the weekend where you don't have anything going on, but on a school day, if you don't take breaks and you're trying to study in the evenings, it's really going to impact on your efficiency of your study. And it's going to be very hard and very tiring. I do not recommend it. So say between 5:55 to 6, I would take a break. So things like check my phone, make coffee if I was gonna have another coffee that late, which I would sometimes, have a drink, have a snack, etc. And then another hour of studying from 6 to 7, and from about 7 onwards, completely me time. Having dinner with family, relaxing. Potentially going out to see a friend if that was possible. Catch up, talk about school, de-stress, talk about all of our concerns, and Netflix, watching movies, doing my hobbies, reading, etc. And with the exception of if I did have a SAC or something, or an important test, or an important task at school, like a practice SAC, or an essay session, I would study a little bit more, revise a little bit more. And like I mentioned, I liked to do this before bed because I found that it made things really stick in my brain if I did it just before bed. And when I would wake up, also on the way to school, like, reading over my notes, revising it again, and then if I went into a SAC, I would remember everything so clearly. Of course, you still need to do enough revision in order to be able to kind of achieve this, but absolutely try it if you haven't, guys. It really works. I cannot recommend it enough. Just make sure this is not something you do every day, because like I said, it's potentially not the best idea for your sleep and stress levels, so only do it before tests and exams. So moving on from organization, we've had a big chat about organization, and hopefully you guys can tell now how important it is. We'll have a chat about how to study in general and some really good techniques. Starting with another big important concept, consistency, being really consistent. So remember I mentioned that we need to consistently work hard, and this is what this is about, because procrastination and laziness, doing nothing or being too lazy to do enough or do anything at all, is going to get us nowhere. How can we improve? How can we get better at a subject, prepare for a SAC if we don't do anything? So it's going to get us nowhere. So therefore, we need to be really consistent and consistently work hard throughout the entire year this year. And this also means coming up with a system that works for us. So obviously, even going back to our organization, do we need to-do lists? Do we need to maintain a consistent routine throughout our weeks? Probably yes, at least the study routine idea. We need to have a system in place that works for us, works around all of our needs and our kind of life circumstances, and is consistent so that it becomes, again, takes the mental effort out of studying, makes it really easy, and not as draining. So an example of a system. So the night before every single class, it would be great if you read over the relevant chapter of the theory in your textbooks so that you know what to expect. This is absolutely optional, but you will find that you will be able to understand information a lot faster and easier. You will be able to contribute a lot more in your classes. You will impress your teachers, and it will make studying that much easier and revision that much easier, especially for subjects that are significantly centered around theory. So any theory subjects, any science subjects, we know understanding really is key. Regurgitation may work, but it stops being effective as soon as we get say, a more difficult question. If we don't understand the topic, regurgitation becomes pointless. Vika doesn't lack the general responses. Really means we need to aim to understand things, be able to explain them in our own words, rather than regurgitate information. So then during class, um, super important, this is not optional, you should always be doing this, taking down notes in your preferred format, whether it's in your notebook or on your computer. Handwritten is better for memory, just gonna put that out there, though it is a little bit slower. And particularly things we didn't realize or understand when we were, reading about that particular chapter in our book and preparing for the lesson. And then we have really good notes for revision as well. And then every single time for every single class that we've had that day, it's amazing if we go home, we make summary notes, we do practice questions, and whatever else works for us as a student in particular helps us consolidate and understand information the best. And then the day after the class, your aim is really to do all of your assigned homework, say practice questions, without trying to look at your notes. The less you look at your notes, the better. This will indicate to you, I understand this, I remember this now. And you will also realize, oh, well, some of the things I need to revise again, study again, consult my teacher about, because I was not able to complete this task without my notes. So some important tips in here as well, guys. You want to physically write your to-do list down. It's going to make it so much more likely that you will remember it and you will stick to it. Have a notepad that every night you can write your list in and cross everything off or tick everything off and get that extra bit of motivation and happiness that you've completed all your kind of mini goals. And when you write your to-do list, do not stop until you have fully finished and included everything that needs to be included. So you probably need to take 5 minutes for this task and make sure you have a think about everything that needs to be done for all of your subjects and everything that's important, rather than like hurriedly, adding things in throughout the day and some things that are important missing. And if you overestimated how much you could get through and realized your list was unreasonable, too long, too many tasks in there, don't cross it out. Just leave it in your to-do list and come back to it the next day or whenever you end up having time. But try not to put it off too much. Some more tips. So at the start of every month, if you create a bullet journal in your book and you can tick off each day that you stick to your study schedule. So this will help you to hold yourself accountable and make sure you stick to your routine that you've developed. So we tick off, did I finish? Did I stick to my study routine on Monday? Yep, tick it off. Did I not? Put a cross next to it. Oh my gosh, I need to catch up. This is really bad. I'm falling out of my routine. Studying, um, I'm falling behind um, in my subjects a little bit, and I don't want that to happen. So hold yourself accountable. Keeping a separate bullet journal to tick off if you're sticking to your schedule or not. And what can really help with motivation is if you think of some kind of physical reward to give yourself. So if you want to buy something nice or something you may convince your parents to reward you with, anything that you really enjoy, or even letting yourself do something that you really enjoy, like a day out with your friends to reward yourself, or something that you really enjoy doing. So create something for yourself, potentially every week or every month that you can give yourself, reward yourself with. Because that delayed gratification, I can only have this after I've done everything I need to do, um, will be much more effective than giving yourself an immediate reward before you've done anything, and then you get into the cycle of always trying to reward yourself when you haven't done anything that deserves that reward, and that will really help you. So this is an example here on this slide of a bullet journal to have that accountability. Only has Mondays to Fridays on it, and you can see it's a calendar. And there's an exception. Every Friday here is a day off, so it's not relevant. But every day we stuck to our study routine completely, and say we did all of the things in our to-do list, we can put a tick next to it. And then if we've done everything that month, we have all ticks on the paper, we get that reward that we've planned for ourselves. And a really important thing to talk about is self-discipline as well. So that means being, in control of yourself, really well. So how can we self-discipline ourselves? Well, first of all, making a conscious effort at the start of the year to set habits and good habits and study routines. And then the next step is making a conscious effort for 4 weeks, so for an entire month, to complete the study schedule every single day, unless there is something that makes it impossible because things do come up. You might have to shift your day off for 1 week, that's completely fine. But 4 weeks straight, we want to be able to stick to our routine that we've outlined. And then once you're in a good habit, then you can give yourself some slack and be easier on yourself. Because you've set your habits, and you'll automatically bounce back to doing what needs to be done. So say you come home from school and you're feeling very, very tired, and you just give yourself a night off. At that stage, that's fine, because you've been sticking to the routine. There's a valid reason why you might be tired, and it's because it's getting a bit much, and that's when you can give yourself some slack. So letting yourself off the hook because you just deserve it is the right thing to do, and that's the self-disciplined thing to do, and not because you can't be bothered, or it's too draining and you feel a bit lazy. um, this is what differentiates good students from bad students. That self-discipline is the most important thing. And having a system, doing what works for ourselves. So some things we need to define and understand for ourselves. Um, what are our most effective ways to study? And these are, the methods that we need to employ whenever we study, so that we can be efficient, spend less time studying and more time doing the things we like, and still get our work done and get it done to a high standard. So there are some examples of, systems that may help you to study. So doing practice questions, creating summaries of your notes and chapters in your book, developing cue cards for theory, posters, videos, mind maps, teaching other people or talking about your subjects, and so on and so forth. This would be a long list, but these are some of the main ones. I personally found that keeping really good notes helped me a lot. So that's something you might find is beneficial for you. Keeping really good notes and to specify these were handwritten notes, I would actually, just because I wrote things down and wrote things down in a lot of detail and I had very detailed notes, that alone would make me really remember well, remember my content well. And then a revision was easy, felt easy. So do what works for you and not what works for the smartest kid in class, or not what people tell you you should do and how you should study. Get to know yourself and how you study, and do not concern yourself too much with what people tell you is the most efficient study strategy. Even teachers, right? Some teachers like to teach in a way where they try to push certain study systems upon students, like those that mind maps, for example. This is fine. Do that if your teacher is requesting you do that in class, and use that opportunity to see if it works for you. But if it doesn't, don't think that this is what I have to do from now on. I have to create mind maps for my concepts and as part of revision. No, absolutely not. Do what works for you. So, an example, some high achieving students didn't even write notes in year 11 or 12. And they still achieved very high scores. So obviously shows that different methods work for different people. Some people might be fine and might do great just from studying from a textbook. I did that for a couple of my subjects. I found that, with the exception of some notes that are essential, I found that highlighting things out in my textbooks was really beneficial for me rather than taking notes, such as for psychology, which was quite a content heavy subject. I found that that really helped me. But you need to find what works for you and stick to those things. And some important advice for you guys. My number one piece of advice for VCE students: understand everything and memorize nothing. So, and I kind of mentioned this idea before already. Try to learn things to the point that they become completely logical and you can just um, explain concepts, including difficult concepts, in your own words. And if you reach that point, you're never going to forget that knowledge as well, even after you're finished with school, chances are. So there are really great study resources online, including very helpful videos that you can find on YouTube. Um, for sciences, I've heard of Khan Academy. They have very short videos explaining some concepts. You can't use it for everything, but you can definitely use a lot of online study resources. Say even for English, you can find really good summaries, really good thematic analyses and quotes for your text that can help you with essays. Even better if you refer to at Unlimited, which has those crucial study guides and things like practice questions, practice exams. If you utilize those resources, you will find that there is a lot out there to help you with your study. And even if you refer to this video, that's kind of linked as an example here, and you look this up on YouTube, this is actually a really good video that goes through some scientifically proven techniques, including spaced repetition, huge one. We're going to talk about this. That will really help you set up amazing study habits and make it really easy for you. So, spaced repetition, what does that mean? Well, when we learn something once, we are going to forget it. So we need to repeat it over time so we do not forget it. If we learned completely new concepts, we are going to revise that on the same day and the next day and potentially another time that week. Then when we feel we've consolidated that knowledge and we're confident in that knowledge, we are still going to come back to it, say, you know, a week later, and then 2 weeks later, depending on our needs, depending on whether there's still issues with our recall, how confident we are at doing the practice questions without our notes, how well we understand that information. We will space out our revision or repetition of the content. So this is what it can look like. You can have timetables of your spaced repetition. So this is a really good example to set up. You can put in your first and second revision dates, for example, and then where it says redo in red, right, that means you have gaps in understanding of the content and you need to come back to it and revise it again. So this is really good. This will, again, practice that accountability, which is very important, and it will clearly show and keep a note of what your flaws and issues are so that you never kind of forget. And then, of course, resources that you're planning to use or that are helpful to use for revising these certain topics. Keeping note of that is also incredibly useful. So you can create your own kind of spreadsheet like this in, say, Excel. You can just do that in Excel, much easier than note-taking format, which would make this very messy because these are going to be very busy notes, guys, especially if you're doing this for several or all of your subjects, which I would really encourage you to do. Cool. Sorry, guys, my slides just decided to go somewhere else. um, there we go. So, active recall, this is something we need to become really skilled at and really reinforce. So, being able to take things out of our brain rather than putting them in over and over again. We need to be capable of taking a concept, taking an idea, doing a mind map or writing down ideas that we get about it and see, do we have an all-around understanding that we can just pull out of our brain of that topic? Or are there many things missing and that we need to revise and review again so we can get that into our active recall? And you can see examples here as well as of how you can make a kind of spreadsheet or note and keep track of this with things in green, meaning the things we're confident in and we can completely take out of our memory, things in yellow, some issues, some flaws here and there, we're not fully there yet, and in red, we really need to come back to this, we're not confident in this topic. So, reinforcing content. There are some ideas for how you can reinforce the content, make sure you understand it super well, and continue to enhance that understanding and enhance your memory of the content. We know the exams are timed. We do not have so much time on our exams that we have time to really think a lot before, say, we write a response to a question or make up our mind what it is we want to say. So we need to reinforce the content that we learn for each subject. So here are some ideas. Attending tutoring classes. This can include, private tutoring, TuteSmart lectures for subjects, etc. Really helps you to reinforce content. Teaching your friends or revising or working with your friends doing the same subject. Doing practice questions, especially without our notes. Making a podcast where you talk through the theory and the subject that you can listen to later, sort of passive learning, not too much stress, and watching videos and accessing online resources that can help you with reinforcing content. Now, let's talk about practice questions. These are essential and super, super important in every one of your subjects. So it's the number one way that we can apply and test our knowledge and see what our issues are with our learning, what weaknesses we still have. And first off, they will help you to improve your understanding of the content and prepare for SACs and also eventually the exam, because we know that a lot of the exams actually consist of these practice questions. So doing practice questions directly helps you prepare for your exam. And you're essentially doing a similar kind of tasks that you're going to be assessed on at the end of the year. So this is really important, amazing, right? We're doing pretty much the most efficient use of our time. Um, for English subjects, we might change this to say do practice essays. That's like doing practice questions for English subjects. Um, and obviously, practice questions should be done whenever you learned something new. So the day of your class, you learned a new topic, you go home, you do practice questions, or when you're revising an old topic. Keep this in mind. Super important. I've kind of mentioned it already, but practice questions are crucial. And then similarly, doing practice exams, hopefully an entire practice exam or sections of a practice exam is invaluable. It's the best way to prepare for real exams because they're quite literally old exams, right? Um, it will give you a great indication of where you are at and what kind of score you would get if you self-mark or get your teacher to mark or your tutor to mark. And you can also track your progress of how much you're getting better and your like average mark whenever you do a practice exam is improving. So it can be a huge motivating factor as well. Instead of saying, things like questions like, what's the minimum amount of exams I should do for a subject? Try to do as many practice exams for each of your subjects as you possibly can. If you would like a high study score, you should do as many practice exams as possible in the lead up to the exam as part of your preparation. And they take a fair bit of time. So make sure you allow for this. Say we talked about a 2 hour study routine, maybe you wouldn't take that 5 minute break. You would instead, during those entire 2 hours, just focus on doing a practice exam for that subject. So we shift our study schedule around to account for our plan, what we wanted to do. And because they take a fair bit of time, again, it's fine if you do like certain sections, but you should still time yourself. Make sure it's timed. Now about notes. Beware of writing notes because a lot of students end up with copious amounts of notes and they end up with beautiful notes and really detailed and beautiful like diagrams and pictures in there of things that they actually haven't learned properly. So never write notes that you haven't learned the content for. This means, say you're reading a chapter in your textbook, subchapter, you're trying to write notes on that subchapter. First, read through the entire thing, think about it in your head, ask questions or look it up if you're not sure about what anything means in there. Read it several times until you understand it, then write notes on it. And that will also help you to remember, but also to exclude the irrelevant material that's in there and only have the relevant material down. So keeping your notes more concise. And after writing a section of notes, quickly test yourself to see that you've learned it before you move on. So say you wrote notes for one lesson. At the end, when you're done, don't just close your book. Ask yourself questions in your head about the content. See if you remember what you've actually written down. If not, go back, revise, read through it again. And it needs to be written in a way that you can use them for revision. So based on your study design, the dot points of your study design, what you will actually be assessed on, excluding any irrelevant information, being as concise as possible, including relevant information, explanations of things that are difficult to understand, and potentially practice questions, especially difficult practice questions with their solutions to help you. Now, information overload is a big issue with notes, with year 12 in general. So how to cope? Knowing only what you have to know. Look at the study design dot points, the key knowledge dot points. Do not learn or try to study anything outside of that. Break it down, break down what each dot point kind of means you have to know about and include, and continue to revise with active recall and spaced repetition. We've talked about all of those things so far, so I won't explain it again, guys. Knowing what you have to know. So obviously the study design is your most important resource for this year for all of your subjects. If you don't have access to it, you can just look it up by Googling name of your subject, VCE study design. Make sure you're looking at the right study design for your current period. You're not looking at an old study design in particular, because they do change every few years. And write your notes based on the study design and not on the textbook. Your textbook includes a lot of additional information, a lot of extra information, and a lot of information to aid your understanding that is not going to be assessed. And print out your study design and highlight it when you are done. Very important to have the study designs of your subjects in front of you and accessible, and highlighting the key things that you need to know. So like I said, study design, one of the most valuable resources you will have in year 12. It literally says exactly what you need to know for the exam and what you will be assessed on, and regular consultation with the study design helps you to identify what you haven't learned yet and also what you need to revise. So nearly all high achievers in terms of both study score and ATAR are familiar with the study design for their subjects. So the beginning of the year as well as the end of the year, approaching exams, are the most important times to revisit the study design, because obviously, again, this is what you'll be assessed on. So this is just an example of what a study design looks like. Biology study design, and make sure you check the accreditation period to see that, to make sure that it's your current year of school. So this example, and I've used this on purpose to show you that I'm not going to work with this study design, print it out and highlight it and waste all this time, because this is an outdated study design. We're now in 2023. So make sure you always check the accreditation period at the top there. And you can see it says all of your outcomes, which are technically like your areas of study / stacks. Key knowledge, the things that you'll need to know for each subtopic that you will be assessed on. And key skills is another subsection that means the things that you need to be able to do, the types of questions you will be asked, etc. Very important. So hopefully you know how to use the study design now, and you can, this aspect of what I've just said is really important. So I really hope you guys use this and take this into account. So what can we see here? There's color coding. We're going to call this a framework to store information much more easily. So in this case, we've kind of color coded. We have yellow objects like the duck, the lemon, the roadwork sign. We have in orange the carrot, the basketball ball, and the ATAR notes, specialist maths course notes, study guide from at Unlimited. And then we have in blue the beach, the butterfly, the blueberries. So keeping a framework to store your information makes it much easier to store large amounts, highlighting the importance of simple things like you want to color code your notes. Maybe you want to use different colors, not only just in your notes, but different colors for your subjects. Put sticky notes in your books. All of these kinds of things are really helpful. It will help you keep track of information. And also the worst thing is like spending a bunch of time just trying to find the relevant information that you're looking for. We really want to avoid that, guys. So this is intended to help you. And this is a really common strategy used by students. Having a chat about revision. Revision is so important, and it is more important than being ahead with content. Because yes, being ahead with content is still super beneficial, but not more so than revision. If we revise, we will never have to overwhelm ourselves whenever a SAC is coming up with studying heaps, and we will have a really good basis going into our exam, all the way to the lead up of our exam. No big gaps in content or understanding, and we will always keep on top. So revision is more important than being ahead. So there are some resources for you guys, like I mentioned spaced repetition already, and also have a look at Kami. These help medical students which study very, very hard, so it should help you guys as well. And looking here, we have the typical forgetting curve for newly learned information that shows if we don't revise, such as the spaced repetition method, how our memory of a topic just completely plummets over just a few days. But if we revise the curve goes all the way back up. Even after 1 day, on average, people have already forgotten 20% of the information. So if we revise, the next day it goes back to 100%, and then 3 days later, it's only hit that 80% point again. So we need to spend much less time on revision to get back up to 100%. So it's super good than having to learn everything all over again and fresh, which will end up being much more time consuming. So then 3 days later, we revise again, we're back up at 100%. And then only a week later, we're back up at 80%. And we just have to revise to get back up to 100%, meaning that we can start to revise topics less frequently and we will still remember 100% of the content. So this is, a really a revision method, that spaced repetition, that I would love to recommend to you guys to check out. And the last section of this bit before we move into ATAR and scaling, we're going to talk about some other tips that I have for you guys for studying NVC. Number one key to success is being consistent. I know I've mentioned this already a few times, but more than anything else, consistent studying over a long period of time will really make the most difference for any student. And it takes self-discipline and effort, but it will get results. And having these qualities is very valuable and will help you for the rest of your life. So if anything, take that as your biggest motivation. And net gains, so the things that will always and will definitely help you and you can only benefit from, so you should aim to do throughout this year. Things like staying hydrated, exercising. Exercise helps with stress, helps with fatigue. Water is important for our health in general. It has health benefits, and also, trust me, it keeps you more focused and awake if you drink enough water. Especially, a lot of people have a lot more water later on during the day, but it's really important to have a lot of water in the morning to the afternoon period, or you will feel really tired and drowsy for the rest of your day. This is all scientifically proven, guys. Try to make sure you drink a lot of water. You can see me drinking little sips of water even throughout this lecture. Do what I do. I'm also talking a lot, so my mouth obviously is getting dry, but do what I do. Have lots of water throughout the day. To that, let's have a sip of water right now. The extra 5 minutes. This is referring to the fact that if you don't fully understand something, say you're following your study schedule or you're in class or whatever, it's done, it's 7. I'm supposed to stop studying now and do whatever I want to do. I will come back to this. I don't fully understand this. No, go and spend the extra 5 minutes or however long it's going to take to make sure you fully understand the information and it's fully there, and you're definitely not going to forget to come back to it, and you can just rest easy, sleep well, not stress. Always put in that extra little bit of time to make sure you 100% understand the content. Make sure you've 100% completed your revision or whatever tasks you had aimed to complete, such as a set of practice questions. Paying attention, class, super important. This is also where you have that amazing opportunity to ask questions if you don't understand something, but you can save a lot more time studying at home if you just use your time to study in class. Using free periods productively, especially your empty like study periods you may have in year 12 to study. You are at school anyway, so do it. Eating well and sleeping well, obviously, no explanation needed here. And staying social, keeping up with your friends, keeping up with your family. Make sure you maintain great supports throughout this year. And organization, which we've already had a chat about, and how much it can help you and benefit you. So we've gotten through all of that first half of our lesson, and now we will be getting into talking about ATAR scaling and prerequisites and how it all works. And this is where I want to encourage you guys. This is a great opportunity for you to ask me any questions in the Q&A. that I can answer to you live, and explain any concerns that you still may have even after these explanations, or any questions you have about uni or courses in general. If I can answer, I'm happy to help, and I will really try my best. So what we're looking at, overview of what we're having a look at. First, we'll explain the ATAR and clear up any misconceptions you may have about it. Then we'll talk about your aggregate scores, which they use to calculate your ATAR. Study scores, how they're calculated, how they're scaled. So, of course, subject scaling, how it all works. And just to start off with, I'll give you a piece of advice or my nugget of wisdom, um, and that in VCE, effort amounts to results. The harder you try, likely the better your results will be. So there are no cheat codes. You cannot, you cannot just think, yeah, it will just work itself out in the end, or I'll catch up with everything at the end of the year. I'll catch up with my subjects. It will all be fine. I'll get the score that I want. That's not going to work, guys. Full disclaimer. So set those habits early and start putting in the effort. So what's an ATAR? We know the ATAR is defined as the Australian Tertiary Admission Rank. That's what the abbreviation stands for. So the key word in that definition is rank. So you are ranked against other students in the state, who are doing VCE year 12 subjects. It is not a score of how well you did. If you get an ATAR of 97%, it doesn't mean that you scored 97% on average on your exams. Hopefully none of you are confused about this part. We're starting off really easy, right? But it means you did better than 97. You're in 97% of students. So you're in the top, say 3%, right? So essentially, your ATAR is comparing you to the rest of the students in year 12 in Australia, all of the students completing VCE. So kind of like I already gave an example, but if you get an ATAR of 95, it means you beat 95% of other students. Whereas if you get an ATAR of 10, it means you beat 10% of students. So you're in the lower 90% of students, which is, not great. Oops. So set your aims high, but set your aims realistically. So your ATAR is calculated from your aggregate. Some of you might not know what an aggregate is, so we'll explain that. It's like a total score of your subjects, and to be more precise, it's the sum of all of your scaled study scores, weighed at different percentages. So adding up all of your scaled study scores. So this will mean that it will include your top English subject. So for those of you only doing one English subject, your English subject will be there, no matter what, no matter how badly you do, how lowly you score. So it has a big effect. You need to focus on English this year. And for those of you doing more than one English subject, only your top English subject has to be in there. So say I did 3 English subjects. English was my highest English subject. That went in my top 3 subjects for my aggregate. But my study scores for literature and English language were a little bit lower, and they were lower than my other study scores, such as legal studies, psychology, that I scored my highest study scores in. So they didn't have to, contribute to my top 3 subjects that have the biggest contribution towards the aggregate and therefore your ATAR. So that's how it works with your English subjects. So it's your top English subject and your next 3 highest study scores, whatever they may be. And then the 10% missing of your aggregate that's going to create your ATAR will comprise of your fifth and sixth subjects. So the subjects you didn't do the best at, your lowest scaled scores. This means you do have room to slip up during year 12 and not do as good as you would like. And that's okay because a couple of your subjects will only contribute 10% to your aggregate. So they will have a very small impact. The impact's a little bit bigger if you're aiming that for that ATAR above 95. Um, because your aggregate will, end up being lower, and in the high range of students, the scores tend to be quite close to each other. What does it also mean? It also means that you need to focus on English this year, no matter what. It is going in your top four scales study scores, which contribute 90% to your aggregate score that creates your ATAR. So that's very significant, obviously. That means each subject of this top four is contributing more than 20% to your ATAR score. So I'm going to explain it a little bit further. Hopefully that made sense to a lot of you. But if not, we're still having a chat about it. So we'll bring it all in together and it will start to really make sense. So this is just an example. Say these were your scaled study scores. So they've already been adjusted. This is not the raw study score that you get, but this is the scaled score. So after it's gone up or down, depending on the adjustment, these are the scores that will be used for your aggregate calculating that. So say we got a 41 in legal studies, we got a study score of 40 in English, methods 37, chemistry 36, biology 31, and physics 28. This is how they will calculate our average aggregate. They'll, for the first four subjects, which are our top subjects, including our English subject, they will just be added together as they are. 41 plus 40 plus 37 plus 36. So these are our scaled study scores from legal studies to chemistry, which were our top subjects. And then the last two subjects are fifth and sixth subject that we got the lowest study scores for. They'll essentially be divided by 10. So instead of 31, only 3.1 is added. Instead of 28, only 2.8 is added. We can see, therefore, they don't have a significant effect. Because say all of our study scores were 50, so our last two subject study scores were 50 as well. The only maximum contribution these values could have had to our aggregate would have been 5.0 anyway for 50 study scores. So if we get 3.1, we've only lost, 1.9 potential aggregate contribution instead of if we consider 2.8, the highest we could have had was 5 because these are only 10%, right? So it's only 2.2 marks off the highest potential aggregate of 5 we could have gotten for the low 10%, our last two subjects. So it's okay if you don't do so well on a couple of subjects. It won't affect you that significantly. That's why, but you shouldn't think of it, you shouldn't have that mentality of, oh, that means I can sacrifice these subjects. No, you should have the mentality of you don't know what to expect, you don't know how you're going to go, there's still a lot of the year left. You don't know how you're going to feel on the exam, how you're going to do on the exam. So you should consider this as more your backup, but not something you will intentionally use to your advantage, because that can really set you up to do poorly on definitely more than a couple of your subjects, and then it will significantly impact you. That being said, English is going to be in your top four. You have to do well on whatever English subject you are doing, depending on the ATAR that you're aiming for, of course. So you can't avoid that. That's going to have a pretty big impact on your ATAR overall. So for this particular example, the aggregate ended up being 159.9. So how it works from here on, your aggregate is then compared to everybody else's aggregate to calculate your ATAR, meaning everybody else in the state doing VCE. So if your aggregate is better than 50% of our students, you would get an ATAR of 50. So that would mean you're completely, in the middle. In terms of, if we put it on a bell curve, you're right there, right in the middle. There's just as many students that scored less than you, and then just as many students that scored um, better than you. So this is what it all looks like. It's kind of a prediction of what kind of aggregates lead to which ATAR. Of course, it's a little bit different every single year depending on how well students did that year, but we can use this as a prediction. So with our example, we had like 158 or something. So we would score about 90, an ATAR of about 90 in that column. And hopefully that makes it a bit more motivating to some of you guys, because the example we used had study scores in the low 40s and study scores in the 30s, etc., and it still would likely lead to an ATAR of about 90. So hopefully that helps to motivate some of you guys. You don't have to get perfect scores to get pretty high ATAR. An aggregate of only 102.4 would lead to that 50 ATAR. That's quite low if we consider, you know, what would we score then? We'd probably score study scores of between 20 to 25 for our subjects, which is, um, you know, not ideal. That's pretty low. But that um, isn't likely to happen to a lot of students. That means we did poorly on all of our subjects, and we also did worse than average on our subjects, because a lot of subjects average around 30 as the study score. And then you need a very high aggregate, so about 210 plus to get an ATAR of 99.95, and significantly lower than that for an ATAR of 95, an aggregate of 171.7. So guys, there is a difference of 40, pretty much 40 aggregate points between an ATAR of 95 to an ATAR of 99.5. What does that mean? It means that a lot of students have aggregates that are very, very high. So then there's a wide range and there's a lot of competition. So the effects of your aggregate start to become pretty significant on how much it's going to affect your ATAR. So the difference between a student that scored a 95 versus a student that's gotten a 97 is quite significant. Similarly, very significant difference between a student that's gotten 97 and a student that's gotten 99. The gap is bigger, there's a bigger range there. Hopefully it's all making sense. I'm quite confident a lot of you will be understanding this, but if not, as soon as a question comes up or you want me to explain anything or go into anything a bit further for you personally, pop it in the Q&A chat and I will reply to you. So how do we get these study scores? So study scores are a score from a range of 1 to 50 for a particular subject. You should all know this, hopefully, guys. And there is a myth that, they're not a mark, they're a mark out of 50. So, say some students think that if you get a 40, it means your mark was an 80% for the subject overall. That's completely not the case. It's not like your study score times 2 is your overall mark for a subject. It's not like that at all. So it's similarly with the aggregate, similarly as with the ATAR, you're just ranked on a scale once again. And you're ranked on a scale depending on how other students did in Victoria. So the average raw score for every or most subjects is 30, exactly 30 out of 50. So if you get a 30, that would mean that you scored higher than 50% of the state, and that 50% of the state scored higher than you as well. So we're right on that average mark. So it really is all represented on a bell curve. For those of you studying math subjects or general maths, this should make a lot of sense. But instead of the x-axis, we have used study scores to represent how people have done. So right in the middle here, our average, our median, is a study score of 30, right? So that means you've scored better than, if we add all this up, 50% of students, but that another 50% of students did better than you. Now, this is an estimate. This isn't a fully accurate uh, way for you guys to potentially think about this, but it's pretty accurate. So take it seriously. You can use this as the real life example. So now, if you've done better than 50% plus 34% of students, so you've done better than a whole 84% of students, your study score for that subject will be around 37, an entire 84%. That's a really good result. So don't think that you need to be scoring a study score of above 40 to be an amazing student, because a study score in the range of 35 to 40 is also very, very good. You've beat a lot of the state. You've beat somewhere between 70 to 85% of the state, depending on what that was, your specific study score. And then if we score a study score of 44, so the mid 40s, we're better than 50 plus 34, so 84 plus 14 plus, so 98% of students. We've done better than 98% of students. So 44 is amazing. That means we're in the top 2% for a subject pretty much. So this 2.15 plus 0.13%, that's how many students approximately did better than us. So if you can score in the mid 40s, you've done amazing. And similarly, a study score of 50 means that pretty much everyone is behind us. We've done better than everyone, but there are variations. So about up to 0.13% of all of the students for that subject might have done slightly better than us. So this will be small differences, like tiny incremental mark differences, right? Now, looking at the other side of the scale, if we score a study score of 23, we have done worse. We have done poorer than 84% of students. If we score a study score of 16, there are only about 2% of students that scored less than us. So this is a bell curve. Now, if you are more interested about understanding this concept of a bell curve, which hopefully I've explained really well and not too mathematically for you guys that are not doing maths and general maths, etc. You can research it a little bit more online. It's quite easy to understand. For those of you who are math students, this is a great example. And hopefully you knew that it all works like this, like with a bell curve. So this is not news to you, but this is a great example of how the standard deviations and the bell curves work. So love it. For study scores, we're on a bell curve that the average for every subject is 30. If we score a 50, we beat all of the students. If we score, around a 37, we've beat almost 85% of students. If we score around a 44, there's only about 2% of students that have done slightly better than us for that subject. Hopefully all making sense. So here is all of that demonstrated on a table for you guys to quickly have a look. It's a little bit different, as you can tell from the bell curve representation in terms of what it means. It's essentially saying around 93% of all students for a subject score more than 20 plus as their study score for a subject, so between 20 to 50. Then only around 78% of all students for a subject will score more than 25. Then only around 53% of students will score more than 30 as their study score for a particular subject. Then 35 plus is only about 26%. So if you get a study score of 35, you're likely to be in the top 75% for that subject, the top 25% for that subject. So you beat 75% of students. 40 plus, less than 10% of students achieve, and 45 plus, or should we say 44 to be more specific with this bell curve, but this is rounded up, right? 45 plus, about 2% of students. Hopefully it's all making sense. I know this is a lot to wrap your head around, but really important and also reassuring knowledge to know, understand how it all works. And it is very complicated, but hopefully you understand now how the exam and the grading and everything works. So you'll not be surprised at the end of the year. So how can we find out what the specific like study scores for a subject are? We have an example here for for chemistry, but essentially you can go on Google to search for grade distributions for a subject. So this is exam grades, right? Ungraded pretty much means like fail, E plus, D plus, C plus, all the way up to A plus, and not recorded being in there. We will show you the total amount of students and the total amount of students that scored in each one of these sections for their grade for the subject and the subject's exam. So you can literally just look this up on Google for your particular subject with the keywords grade distributions. And you will not only get a table you can quite easily read and get through, but you will also get a table or graph showing the grade distribution that makes it really visually easy to illustrate. So say in this one we see that the most common score and pretty much we can say this is the average score is around C plus for chemistry, and that very little people get that E or E plus, so doing very poorly in the exam. But then the number of students scoring in the A plus range is also a lot less, but it's still quite significant. So we know there's quite a bit of competition to get that really high study score, right? But this chemistry grade distribution reflects the same standard bell curve distribution, pretty much the same, because look here, about 88.6% of students scored in the A plus range, around 9%. So they all of these students that got this A plus will be in the study score range of 40 to 50, depending on how many marks exactly it was when they calculated it. Because to be in the A plus range, it's still a range, right? It's still a large range. So low A pluses versus high A pluses, that makes the difference in the study score, whether it's close to 40, whether it's closer to 50. So this really will help you apply that bell curve example to your specific subject and really understand it very well. So for example, to get an A plus on an exam, it's saying that you need about at least 182 out of 240 total marks, so 76% at least. So then it's that whole range, that's that 9% of students between 76% to 100% score, right? The 100% that likely got 50 study score, just the people that scored 76% likely just got a study score of 40, and puts it into perspective and really shows that it's not just getting an A plus that's important, but then it's also like how where you are in that range from a low A plus to a high A plus. And that makes a significant impact on your study score. It's a range of 10 entire marks, right? So you need to, if you're aiming for a mid 40s, you need a quite a high A plus mark. Um, so some students had the misconceptions, and students that I've taught personally as well, that if you get an A plus, that's all that matters. If you missed a couple of marks um, for the A plus section and you scored in the A section, that's why your study score was a lot lower. No, it doesn't matter if you're in the letter A or in the letter A plus. It's more important where you are in that range in terms of the total marks. That's what's actually looked at. Then the categories of A plus are just then applied to visualize it all and separate students into categories. But all of those sections are arranged from low to high A plus, low to high as well. The size of those ranges differs, yes, but so does then the number of students that tend to score in each of the ranges. So therefore, to get a 40, you needed to get around 76% on the exam. Similarly, if you got between 95 to 100% on the exam, we think you might have a study score of, say, 49 or 50, quite likely. What else can you see that's quite important in this grade distribution template? We can see the total number of students, not only for separating to each gender, so you can compare how females versus males did in a subject that's relevant to you. It doesn't actually have any real significance, and it's always pretty similar. But the other thing you can do is see how many students you're on average competing against for each subject. So how many students are going to be getting their own respective marks and taking up spots in this grade distribution, right? So we see that for chemistry, there's about 10,200 students in total doing the subject that year, 2020. So look this up for your own subjects, try to walk through it. It's very useful information. And, there are HR calculators out there, but it's probably better if you understand it yourself rather than using those without having any idea how they work or what they even mean. So you really want to, and you can use this to predict your study scores to use an HR calculator as well. So now that we understand how study scores work, we also want to have a full talk about it, how they're calculated. I know we've been introducing the topic, but we haven't fully gone through it. So the process is like this. Your SACs and exams are assigned a graded assessment, such as graded assessment 1, unit 3, SACs, graded assessment 2, example unit 4 SACs, and graded assessment 3, your exam. For most subjects, your graded assessment 1, graded assessment 2, your SACs add up to about 50% of your study score for the subject, and your graded assessment 3 will be 50% of your study score for that subject. But there are exceptions to this. This is not for all of our subjects. So for example, a letter grade from E to A plus is assigned to each graded assessment, including your SACs, including your exam. And we just looked at that in that grade distribution. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense for you guys. So A plus indicates that we're about in the top 10% of students. Now, this is still a big range, as we've talked about. So the study score derived from how well you did in each of the 3 graded assessments. And it's also considering how much those graded assessments are weighted. So like we said, graded assessment 1 and graded assessment 2 in a lot of subjects are each 25%, and the exam, graded assessment 3, tends to be 50%. This is not for all subjects though. This does vary across which subjects you're doing, so you can double check that information. Either look it up or check it with your teacher or read it on the VCA page for your subject. So once we have our study scores, which consist of our exams and our stacks and how much they're all worth contributing towards our study score, they will then get scaled. So this might be what a lot of you guys have been looking forward to, talking about subject scaling. Now, why do they get scaled? It makes the process as fair as possible by making every subject even to all of the other subjects. Now, how it's more fair to do this than to not do this. How accurately it gets done, you might question the process a little bit, but in the end, the aim is to benefit more students rather than to harm or make it unfair to other students. So it's more fair to scale than to not scale. And it's not a negative thing. Do not think scaling is a bad thing. That will make more sense when I explain it. You will hopefully start to think it's not a bad thing. So, how does scaling work? So, some people think scaling is to do with um, things like performance across different schools for the same subjects because some schools have more strict teachers and stacks are more hard, etc., for the same subjects, but that's not how it works. It's actually reflecting how competitive a subject is, not how difficult it is to learn or study or complete stacks or exams. So, how competitive a subject is gets measured by how well students in that subject, all the students doing that subject, the same subject, perform in their other subjects. So, thinking about that sounds pretty fair because if you're a student of that subject, you and everyone else doing that subject, it's measuring and taking into account all of the other subjects that they're doing and how much higher or lower they will score for all of those other subjects. So a range of subjects, pretty much. It's in the end, because of how many students each subject has, all of the subjects will be taken account when scaling. Now, this is really complicated. We can't exactly, as you can tell, 100% work out how this is done. So this is just an idea that you have to understand rather than be like, this is exactly how they calculate this, because that's going to be impossible, guys. It's very complicated. So, for example, compare specialist maths versus PE as subjects in terms of their competitiveness. Thinking about it, are students going to perform much better in PE or maths? Say I'm a student doing both those subjects. What do you think? Probably I'm going to find P a little bit easier. So it's more likely it's going to get scaled down versus specialist maths is found very difficult by a lot of students and often study scores coming back lower than their other subjects. Therefore, it's going to get scaled up. And it's just how simple it is. That's just how simple it is, guys. So basically, the entire idea of scaling is to equalize all of our subjects. So people think that scaling gives you a reward or a punishment, but it's completely not the case. It just makes it fair, guys. And it doesn't have a significant effect on your ATAR as well. When subjects are scaled down, they're not like scaled down heaps, but you do have some subjects that get scaled up so many marks, so it can, in that case, potentially only more likely to benefit you. So theoretically, not saying how accurate this is, but this is the assumption that they use when they scale our subjects, that it's just as hard to get a scaled score of 45 in specialists as it is to get a scaled score of 45 in further. So say specialist that year is getting scaled up by 6 marks. So you only need a raw, say 39. This is just out of my head. I don't know exactly because I haven't done specialists. 39 is going to get scaled up to 45, but further is getting scaled down by 2 points. So you actually got a 47 and it got scaled down to 45. But this is supposed to be just as difficult to get the same scaled study score. So the idea is that for you to score A 39 raw score in specialist should be just as hard as scoring a 47 in further maths. How accurate do you think that is? Maybe you don't agree with that. But again, they use the competitiveness of all the students' subjects to create this. So they use actual data from everyone around the state. So it is fair. The difference is then when we apply it to each individual student, you might not fully agree with that because we all have different things that we're good at, and those that competitiveness and those scaling down, scaling up, it might not reflect our own experience. Maybe it is easier for us to get a 39 in specialist than it is to get a 47 in further maths, but that's just us as an individual. This is what they've concluded looking at all of the students in the state. So it's more fair than not doing it. And that's the idea intended behind it. So scaling is designed so that there is no reward and no punishment for taking a subject. I was really sad to see a lot of students still not understanding this and taking subjects because they get scaled up, like students doing even like doing specialists or methods because they get scaled up. But it's the way it works is it's supposed to make sure that you don't get rewarded or punished for doing a subject, and it's all equalized because scaling has adjusted for competitiveness. So it's ensuring that there's a level playing field in terms of all your study scores coming together to form your ATAR. No one is disadvantaged by how their ATAR is going to turn out because of scaling. So it makes VCE fair. Do not stress about it. Do not think about it if you don't fully understand it, but this explanation has helped you to get the gist of it. Don't think about it any further than that. It's enough if you kind of just understand what I've told you guys, and it's really quite a lot of important information that we've gone through. Like, use the last few minutes, that we still have of this lecture to ask me any questions and have me explain anything to you guys. Um, and I will answer your questions absolutely. And hopefully that all made sense. Definitely, probably the hardest thing of all of that to understand is subject scaling. And, I don't even know how it works 100% entirely. No one really does because that data of the adjusting for competitiveness, that's not made available to us. You know how we could access, how the grade distributions work for every subject, how the aggregate works to form your ATAR. We can access that accurate information, and for each previous year, we can access that accurate information, but not with scaling. So it's really complex. You just need to wrap your head around the idea and what it does and how it works. Wrap around the idea that it's fair and it's not intended to disadvantage you in any way, shape, or form, or to boost certain students up for doing a particular subject. That is what it tries. That is specifically what it tries to prevent, and hopefully made sense. But knowing that, this recording and these slides for this lecture, they will be they've been shared with you. They will be made available after the broadcast, and you can literally, read through it again, listen to my explanations again, if you find it important and you're very interested in it, until it makes sense to you. So hopefully that was a big help. Hopefully, you all had some misconceptions that have been corrected about it, and hopefully you've all learned some really important and great tips about that mindset, organization, studying tips that I've provided you with. And hopefully we're all getting motivated for the rest of this year and thinking of some really good strategies and things that I've recommended that we would like to adopt to make year 12 easier for ourselves, but also have a better outcome at the end of the year in terms of our study scores and in terms of our ATAR. So a summary of that last little bit that we've talked about VCE score calculation. Very complex topics, guys, and it's okay if you find them complex to understand. First of all, that your raw study scores are scaled based on the competitiveness of the subject, and then that your aggregate is calculated off your scaled study scores. after they've been scaled, remembering not raw. So our English subject, as well as three other top subject scaled study scores, will contribute 90% to our aggregate, and then 10% of our aggregate will either be composed of our study score for our fifth, our worst subject, or 5% each of our fifth and sixth lowest subject. So that's how it all works. So obviously, this is why also a lot of you have done or are doing six subjects. So you potentially you've already done a year 12 subject in year 11, or you're just doing six subjects in year 12, is because it does have even out the contribution to your study score a little bit, and it actually quite helps with your ATAR. Like if your fifth worst subject contributed 10% versus you had two subjects contributing 10%, you can imagine which option is better. If you had two subjects you did a bit worse in, one of them is likely still going to be higher than the other, and it helps your study score just your ATAR score just a little bit by helping your aggregate. So I've just explained aggregate again. Hopefully you all get it now. But your aggregate is, yes, calculated off your scaled study scores. Again, top four subjects, including English, and 10% of fifth and sixth subjects. Again, your ATAR is calculated off your aggregate score. And we looked at the table that showed from 2016, like the distributions. You can refer back to it because it's pretty similar every year. Um, you can also access last year's distribution of ATARs online based on the aggregate scores. That's information that's always published and shared with us. They do vary a bit year by year, but not significantly. We can take that summary table as what we want to have a look at. So certain ranges of different aggregate scores indicate a certain ATAR based on how students have done that year across comparing all of their aggregates together from all of the students within the state. And this is saying, so should I pick a subject because they scale up? Absolutely not. And we've explained already how scaling is not supposed to advantage you or disadvantage you, so absolutely do not take subjects because they scale up. We can also see something interesting is that if you score very high for a subject as your raw score, say in the mid to high 50s, or for some subjects even in the bit lower 40s, it will not get scaled down significantly. So it will get scaled down very insignificantly because you've scored so high. So just to let you know, similarly, if you score very high for a subject that scales up, the scaling up will not have a significant effect on your scaling. It will not significantly scale you up. So be mindful that scaling is pretty much almost irrelevant besides you understanding it. But picking subjects because they scale up is absolutely pointless. And only choose subjects based on what you think you're good at and what you think you can score highly in and what you enjoy studying. So where it gets a bit more complicated is SAC moderation, what you get for your results, which has your SAC marks in there as the first two letters, right? These aren't necessarily your actual SAC marks from throughout the year, because your SAC marks actually get changed or moderated depending on how well your school does on the exam, your school in particular. So we're taking this P example with two A pluses there for SACs, right? That's just been underlined. Those are your SAC marks, the first two. So why does this happen? So imagine you write a great English essay and feel very happy, and then you just get a B on your essay, on your SAC. So it turns out that this B was the best mark in your year level, and the teacher is just a tough marker because that's just the circumstances, your teacher and your school. Should that disadvantage you? No. But then you have your mates at another school who writes a very average essay and gets an A because their teacher is a really easy marker. So because this isn't fair, VCA will look at how well your school your cohort doing that subject did on the exam, and then adjust your SACs, either higher or lower. For those people with easy markers and it's easy in their school to do well, they haven't prepped for the exam sufficiently, their class doesn't do so well in the exam, their SACs might get moderated down a bit. Similarly, you have a harsh, strict teacher who you feel is stingy with the marks, you do great on the exam, and so is your other people in your school because you have that strict marker, um, and your SACs will get moderated up. So this is just intended to help you and make it fair across all schools and all levels of education, and making it also equal between public schools and private schools. So let's have a look at this table. School A, average SAC mark 90%, but then the average exam mark was 50%. So their SACs will get moderated down. Um, this will also, of course, in the end have an effect on your ATAR. In School B, SACs 50%, exam marks 80%, so their SACs will get scaled up. In School C, SAC and exam marks are the same, so they will stay about the same. And this isn't the exact process that VCA uses because we do not have access to this, but this is their reason for moderating SACs and kind of how we estimate it works. And with these examples that, right, like the SAC mark and the exam mark is so different from each other, we can definitely accurately say they would have these exact effects on moderation. We just don't know by how much. It's all about making VCE fair. So they really try to make the whole VCE process fair for us. Rankings are basically how your SAC scores actually get moderated. Your ranking for a subject is where you are ranked in your year level at school compared to everyone else at your school based on your SAC scores at that school compared to everyone else's. So if you have the second best average SAC score throughout the year, your ranking will be number 2, and if you have the best average SAC score, your ranking will be number 1. So for the purpose of this example, we're going to pretend that there's only 5 people doing a particular subject in your year level. We see how they've been ranked based on SAC. So Bob got 90% average SAC score, so he's all the way at the top, number 1. So he gets an exam score of only 70%, but because he was number 1 on SACs, and his moderated SAC score, we could say, is going to be 95%. So the exam score, that's not great. That's going to affect him a bit, but his SAC was still moderated to go up a little bit because he had the highest SAC ranking in his school. So it still gets moderated up for him. It wouldn't be fair otherwise. But at the same time, your exam score is also taken into account when moderating your SAC. So say Jill only got 50% average SAC score and she was the lowest in terms of SAC ranking in her school for that subject. However, she did get a 70% on her exam. So her moderated SAC score was brought up all the way to 65% because she did well on the exam. She did just as well as Bob, who was number 1 for SACs. So it makes it all super, super fair. And you can look at this example in a little bit more detail if you're interested, but I think I've explained everything here for you guys. So you need to keep in mind that your exam score still counts as your exam score, and it's not going to change, and it counts a lot towards your study score. It's usually about 50% for a lot of subjects. So you need to do as well as you can on the exam, and still in every SAC because that has a significant effect. And remember, back to SAC moderation. The bottom line is that you want to do as well as you can on every SAC so you can get a good ranking in terms of your school. And you also want your whole year level to go well on the exam. You need to be able to show that your SAC marks are reflective, that you have all of that information in your head and you can do just as well every single time. So there's a link to an ATAR calculator for you guys if you would like to put your own scores in and see what kind of scores for your subjects you need to get a certain ATAR, and it will show you both your aggregate and your predicted ATAR score. So looking at these examples, study scores that are average, we said are 30. So this person only scored 30s and then they got scaled different amounts depending on the subject scaling, but their ATAR was 73.75. So if you get study scores of around 30, you're likely to get an ATAR around between 70 to 75, which is still pretty good, guys, and can get you into a lot of courses. Now, if we only score raw scores of around 35 and various, some of these scores get scaled up, some of them get down, we end up with an ATAR of about, in this example, 87.95, but we can just accurately say, depending on the particular subject, we might end up with an ATAR of around 85. So like I said, study scores of 35 are really good because they indicate we're in the top 25%, around the top 25% for that subject. And then study scores of just 40. In this example, some of them getting scaled up and down. This made the student end up with an ATAR of 96.40. So you might have remembered back to my example how I said I got an ATAR of 96.70. I actually did a lot of subjects that got scaled down, right? So I had like study scores like 47 and 44s, but a lot of my subjects got scaled down. I ended up with an ATAR of 96.70, but still my scale scores were quite a bit better than the ones in this example. So when it just shows when you get to that high range of ATARs, is that even small changes in your scaled score start to make a bigger difference because you're ranked against all of the other students. So just something to consider. And a student that's gotten study scores of all 45s, some scaling up, some scaling down, but not significantly, remember, because we said that if you score in the mid to high 40s, scaling does not have a significant effect. An ATAR of about 99. These are all just these are not, don't take this word for word. It's different depending on what subjects you do. It's different depending on how all the students do that year. It varies depending on a lot of things. So just take these as vague examples, but use the ATAR calculator for your own subjects and look at that instead. So my second tip is to control what you can control and don't worry about the uncontrollable, like scaling you cannot control. Do not stress yourself about things that you cannot do anything about. We can control how well we do on SACs and the exam, or at least how prepared we are. We know that we've done everything we could do, but we cannot control our ranking in terms of our SAC ranking in our school, our subject scaling, or our SAC moderation, just how, because that's a direct effect of our ranking. And we cannot control our aggregate or our ATAR in the end. So the attitude to have during year 12 and the attitude that I had is to do as well as I could on every SAC and exam and see where it gets me, and always work to improve and do better. And when I don't do well, use that as motivation going forward. So overview, summary, we complete SACs at school, and based on your results, you will receive a ranking. And then you do the exam. Your SAC results are moderated based on the exam performance of your year level, including you, and your ranking in terms of SACs. Then you get a raw study score from 1 to 50 for each subject based on your moderated SAC results and your exam results. Your raw study scores are then scaled based on the competitiveness of the subject. Your aggregated is calculated off your scaled study scores. So the top 4 subjects, 10% of our 5th and 6th subjects, and your ATAR is calculated off your aggregate score. And that's all of it. Go back to any of these ideas if still finding it difficult. But thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining this lecture. I really hope it helped a lot. We're going to set really good study habits going forward, whether you're in year 11 or year 12. And we now understand how VCE scores are calculated completely. Hopefully, I really hope I got you to that level, or if not, you took the opportunity to ask questions that I could help with and explain things further. But thank you so much for coming, and I really wish good luck for the rest of the year and your VCE journey. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this ATAR Notes April Lecture Series week, and you find it very useful.